Well, good morning. Today's video, we're going to be converting this Honda generator that's currently running exclusively on gasoline to run on either propane or gasoline. The kit that we purchased was called the Motor Snorkel kit from US Carburation. It utilizes a very thin gasket that's part of the assembly that fits between the carburetor and the air filter. If you looked at one of our previous videos, we had used a very large block instead of this small gasket, and sometimes that necessitated either cutting the frame of the generator or modifying the air filter housing. With this system, we're not going to have to do that. I also picked up a little tachometer so we can kind of get a baseline of what the generator's doing on gasoline, and then if we're able to do the conversion, we'll put the tachometer back on and see if the engine is running exactly the same, and we'll put a little load on and see what happens. So let's get right to the video of the installation, and I'll show you the unboxing first. You'll see the components, and we'll show you how easy it seems to be to put on. Okay, so here's the kit as it came from the manufacturer, and this was US Carburation. And I've already opened it, but I'll show you what it came with. This is probably the most important part of it, and it's an explanation of why their new Motor Snorkel is so effective in burning propane. It gives you an overview of the whole system, and certainly directions are included. The key to this system seems to be this Motor Snorkel, and what it does, we're going to install it to replace the gasket that's between the air filter and the carburetor. So we're going to take out that gasket, we're going to replace it with this gasket, and this snorkel part here is going to go directly into the carburetor past the open choke plate. And that essentially is the entire installation. Of course, we're going to snake this line over to this part, which is their oversized regulator. And they give you this monstrosity here with the ability to drill 2 holes and attach it to the frame of the generator. So that seems pretty secure. The hardware is all included in here for the regulator, for the propane adjustment, and seems pretty easy to put together. So let's get right to it, and what else is in here? Oh, all kinds of ties and bolts to secure these to the frame. Regulator for high pressure propane. Looks pretty easy. Let's get right to the generator. Let's start taking apart the air filter, and we'll see if we can get this thing installed. But first, I want to get that tachometer to get a baseline on this generator as to how powerful, how many RPMs is it putting out, and then we're going to do it again when it's running entirely on propane. So let's get this generator started, and we'll get a reading on the RPM. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this induction wire around this plastic coil that's attached to the spark plug. I don't know how well you can see it in there, but we're going to go around about 4 or 5 times, and I'm going to attach it with a piece of painter's tape just temporarily to hold it in place, and then we'll attach the unit itself. Okay, we've got that induction wire wrapped around the plastic coil 5 or 6 times as the instructions say, and we're keeping the wire away from anything that can get hot. And here we have the meter itself, and there's some double-sided sticky tape, so we'll just kind of put it right over here so it doesn't bounce around while this thing is running, and we'll get our initial baseline reading. Let's get it started up and see what it is. Okay, so let's get this started and make sure this is on 0. And we'll give it a couple of pulls. Turn that on. A little bit of choke. Okay, now let's put a load on. Okay, well, now we have some sort of baseline as to what the RPMs are on this engine running and with a load on it. The propane is not supposed to affect the governor on the engine whatsoever. So let's get started on the conversion and we'll run this thing again and see what we got. Okay, we're ready to begin removing the air filter assembly on this Honda engine. But first, we need to take into consideration where we're going to mount the regulator. We're going to be coming out of the carburetor down here. We could come this way, and this frame is a pretty convenient place, except I believe it's a little too close to this exhaust. Or we could go across to the other side. But that's kind of a long run. The way this regulator is made is very interesting. There are two mounting holes on the top, one here, one here. And if I drill two holes in the frame, I could put it right in this location. They provide you with long bolts that would go through here, through the frame, with plenty of room, a washer and a nut, and this would be nicely secured in this area. But then I noticed this generator has some holes drilled in to the base down there. And if we look at the bottom of this regulator, there are some mounting holes right there, and US Carburation nicely gives you small bolts that will fit right in here, and lo and behold, they match up exactly with the holes that are pre-drilled down there. So my goal is going to be to try to route the gas supply from the carburetor down into this area. That would be nice. It avoids the heat from here, away from any moving parts, very convenient and easy to access. So let's get into this air cleaner, get that off, and see if we can mount the snorkel to come down into this direction. Okay, the first thing to remove this air cleaner, we'll take this nut off and try not to lose them, and this housing will come right off. This exposes the air filter, and we got some, let's get this nut off. If you notice, I wiped down the housing before I took it off. It's pretty clean because we're going to be accessing the carburetor, and we don't want to drop all kinds of foreign material in there. Okay, and again, we'll take this off and try not to lose it. This is the air filter. Should lift right off. And actually, this one was pretty clean, I have to admit. Now this gets a little tricky here. This slips right off, but here's a part you don't want to lose on these Honda generators. This gasket right here. This seals the air filter to the housing. And if you lose this gasket, when you put the air filter in, it doesn't do anything. There's no filtration. It doesn't seal it well. Let's get a little closer and I'll show you how to remove this housing here. On the top here, there's a 10 millimeter bolt anchoring this assembly to the engine itself. So we want to get that off first. There we go. That wasn't too tight at all. We can spin that right off. And right below it, you'll see a breather hose that's attached. Well, let's get this off and try not to lose it. Okay. And this breather hose, we should be able to just pull right off. There we go. Now we're going to come around to the front. There's two more 10mm bolts, one right here and one right there. Okay, now there's two bolts, one here and here. They're both 10mm bolts, so we want to get those off. Loosen those up. I had a Honda engine in the past, and it took me forever to get this housing off because I was making one basic mistake. And most of the GX series of Honda engines are exactly the same. And I'll show you the mistake that I made where I couldn't get it to come off. There's two levers you can see on the right-hand side. One is gray, and the other is black. This is the choke, and this is the fuel control. Right now, the fuel is on. You can't pull this off. You need to shut the fuel. That allows some room for this housing to slip off. So we move both the choke and the fuel lever like that, and now we should be able to just slide it right off. There we go. There's the gasket that we're looking to replace, and this is where our snorkel is going to fit in. So let's get closer, and we'll show you how we can install that. Okay, so here we are, and this is the gasket for the carburetor. The air housing, the air filter housing has come off, and we're going to remove this gasket. Probably keep it, I guess. And this is where the motor snorkel will engage on the carburetor. We're going to line up the studs here and here, and this becomes crucial now. The choke must be open. That choke plate has to be open like that so that the snorkel itself will enter the carburetor all the way in. And we can seat these down. And that is fully installed. The snorkel is going directly into the carburetor. This is replacing the gasket that we took off. Now all we do is reverse the process of putting the air filter back on. But what we wanted to accomplish here is that this hose is exiting in this direction, which is going to bring us down to the frame where we're going to be mounting the regulator. And that's all there is to setting this up. The snorkel must go in past the choke plate directly into the carburetor, and this is the gasket replacement. Now we'll put it all back together. I don't think you need to see that. Okay, we're almost ready to mount it onto the generator, but first what we'll do is we'll prepare the regulator, and this is what's called the load block. I'm not quite sure yet how this is adjusted, but let's put it all together. It'll make it easier later on. They provide you with this material, which I've never really seen before, and they tell you to rub it into all the threads, liberally rub it, and there we go, that's plenty. And this fitting goes right in here. And you can see the barbed end is where the hose that's going to the carburetor is going to fit into. We don't have to make it that tight, but we will. Okay, the hose will fit right onto here. And the next part is going to be this nipple, and we're going to put, again, a liberal amount of this material on there. I'll put it on both sides. It's pretty cool. Certainly better than the tape, which I always end up putting on backwards. Okay. Now this will screw into here. And we'll tighten it down. That's pretty good. Now this is the part that's going to face the carburetor. So we're going to take out this gadget, and this is going to fit right onto here. And we can give it a final tightening once we have it mounted. But that essentially is what we need to mount. And we're going to be using these bottom holes. And this last red protective cap is for the inlet for our propane. So that should be pretty interesting. This essentially is done. We've got the load block done up here. And this is going to get mounted now. Let's screw it in, and then we can do our connections. Well, the next part of the installation is to install this regulator onto the frame of the generator. And to do that, we're going to use these 7/16 short bolts with some lock washers. And as I mentioned previously, there were some pre-drilled holes in this frame. And it makes it real convenient to do this. So we're just going to get this started and get these tightened down. There's one. And we'll get the other one in. We've got a lock washer on them. Hopefully the vibration of the generator is not going to shake these loose. And the other nut, I'll find a hole right there. And that's just a real good spot to locate it. So I'm going to get these tightened down. And our hose going from this regulator to the carburetor, we're going to cut it to length. And we're just going to tighten this up a bit. And we'll leave that a little play in that one there in case I have to move it. There it goes. And now our hose from the carburetor should extend right about over there. Now that looks pretty good with no severe bends in it, so we'll cut that there. That's good. And now we'll get that onto that barbed fitting. And that should be pretty good. They don't give you a clamp, but just to make it a little bit more secure, I'm gonna put a plastic tie around it. And I guess one day I'll replace it with a clamp. Tighten it down and snip it off. Okay. Now we're ready to install our gas line into this orifice directly to the propane tank, and we'll start it up. This is our adjustment knob. We're going to be playing with this in a little bit, but let's get the propane tank. Okay, we're ready now to attach the regulator to the barbecue tank. And it's pretty much self-explanatory. There's an arrow for the direction. So there's going to be a fitting here and a fitting here. And of course, we're going to put some dope on those threads to prevent any leakage. It's pretty much self-explanatory, so we're not going to show you that. But what's important to me is the hose that's used to connect it. This is a typical barbecue hose. It's the kind that comes with your barbecue set and your propane tank. It's 1/4 inch. US Carburation recommends that 1/4 inch be used only for engines of 5 horsepower or less. The engine we're using is 13 horsepower. so it's a lot stronger, and they require a 3/8 inch hose. You can see the difference in the two hoses here. Believe me, I made the mistake of trying to get away with this one. It sputtered, it really didn't start, and their service department recommended that I purchase this hose, and we'll see if it makes a difference. But there's quite a difference in the size of these two. So let's get all the fittings in, we'll get it hooked up, and we'll be ready to start. Okay, well, as you can see, the connections have been made to the propane supply. Next thing we're going to do is shut our gasoline supply with this little petcock. We shut that, and we're going to run the generator till the gas that's in the carburetor is used up. Next thing here, this regulator, we're going to put a mark with a magic marker on top, and that's going to be so we can determine how many turns we're making. The instructions call for 5 turns, between 5 and 7 turns. The more you turn it counterclockwise, the more fuel you're allowing to go in. So let's get this. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That should be good. And we'll tighten this down. Okay, we're ready. Let's wheel this outside and see if it'll start. Okay, we've turned on the propane supply, and the first thing they suggest is a little priming, and right behind here is a button, and we just press it for about a minute, no, about a second or two at the most. And that's all you're supposed to do. No choke on alternative fuels. Let's see what happens. First pull. The RPMs are just about with gasoline. Well, that worked. To shut it off, you just shut the source of fuel off. You just kind of starve it out, don't leave any fuel in the lines. And I have to tell you, it was one of the easiest installations I ever did. One mistake I made, and I kind of caught it before, is this line right here, going from the carburetor to the regulator. If you remember in the initial installation, this line was drooping down and coming up. I made a more direct path by cutting it shorter and putting it in like that. Now, if I want to run it on gasoline, what I do is cap this line off. I just kind of pinch this off, turn on the fuel supply, and we're ready to run on gasoline. Easiest installation I ever did. Probably from beginning to end, half an hour. Well, that worked out really well. I'll just mention 3 things in closing briefly. If you go back and look at our original video of converting a gasoline generator to run on propane, we used that old method of that very thick block that had to go onto the carburetor. This Motor Snorkel design is absolutely fantastic. There's no additional modifications that you have to do to your generator. You don't have to cut the frame, you don't have to cut the air filter, nothing. It just fits right on in place of the gasket. The second thing is Motor Snorkel has great customer service. They don't pay me. I paid full price for the conversion kit and all the accessories that I bought. Their customer service is excellent. You call them up, you have a question, they're timely, they're professional, they get right back to you if you send a question in online, and everything they did helped. Does it work? It works absolutely great. My biggest problem, biggest mistake I made was I should have bought the conversion kit for 3-fuel, propane, gasoline, and natural gas. In my area here, I don't have natural gas, so I figured I didn't need it, not thinking that I might ever move someday. So if you're going to do the conversion, go for the couple of extra dollars and get the tri-fuel conversion kit. Well, I hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you did like it, please consider subscribing. Click on your bell notifications. We got a great video coming next week. And thanks so much for watching. Great day.